Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
Terence Dean Adams, John Stephen Ambrosini, Carl Joseph Andrus, Thomas Albert Badger, Norman Casey Ballard, Jeffrey Lawrence Barlow, Timothy Michael Barmer, Ludwig George Bauman, Leon Beard, Sammy Lee Bedwell, Clifford Raymond Bennett, Robert Edward Bexley, Richard Gale Bellotta, Harold Edwin Berkey, Howard Robert Bijak, Edwin Blakely Jr., James Calvin Bodison, Billy Carroll Bolton, Larry Ovid Julian Booty, Glenn Roy Brost, David John Budka, Gerald Joseph Boulin, Harmon Wayne Burks, Gary Ralph Carpenter, Edward Eddie Cervantes, Jose Chappell, Gary Allen Cheshire, Ralph E. Clark, Richard Joseph Clements, Rocky Lee Cooper, Francis Patrick Cox, Richard Davenport, William Leslie Daisy Jr., David Wayne DePriest, Ruben Delgado, William Allen Dixon, Richard Kenneth Drake Jr., James Allen Dunsing, James Paul Duncan, Alfred Thomas Dwyer, Paul Joseph Edge II, Harold T. Edmondson Jr., Alan Charles L., Arthur Floyd Elliott, Anthony Edwin Elliott, Charles Esters Jr., Donald Allen Evans, Blake Wiley Ferris Jr., Robert Anthony Firebaugh, Peter Wellesley Foote, Robert Wayne Forkel, Stephen Edward Frederick, Norbert Louis Froelich, Michael Bruce Fry, Richard Garcia, Rafael Garcia Pagan, Curtis Taylor Gay, David Daniel Gensimer III, Paul Edgar Gerlach, Paul Stephen Goggin, Creighton Rooney Grant, Jehovah Graves, Richard Paul Gray, Remy Hendrickus Grief,
Lawrence Douglas Green, James Leonard Green Jr., William Ephraim Grenet, Louis Cancion Grove, Howard Wayne Gullickson, Ronald Wayne Hackney, Lee Hamilton Hara, Roy Elbert Haviland, Richard Theodore Himes, Raymond Lee Hill, Alfred Jefferson Holden, Paul David Holloway, Cleveland Holmes, William Joseph Hurst, Robert Nelson Hutter Jr., Gary Neal Isaacs, Roy Lee Jackson, Todd R. Jackson, Wallace Ray Jacobson, Ronald Norman Jasinski, Calvin Lee Johnson, Prince Arthur Johnson Jr., Bobby Eugene Jones, Clifford Jones Jr., John Henry Jones Jr., Wilbert Dwayne Kanosh, Harper Brown Keeler, Dennis Ben Coons, James Michael LaRouche, Louis Angel LeBron, Paul Edgar Lee, Robert Eric Lockridge, Marcello James LaFaro, Ralph Edgar Mabry Jr., Dennis Louis McGree, Gerald Joseph McGuire, Daniel Irvin Mambretti, John Edward Manning, Robert J. Maurice, Jerry Marcus, Miloslav Jose Martinovsky, Melvin Lee Martz, Wallace Kenji Matayoshi, Jack Roger McKee, Patrick James McKinley, George Wayne McReynolds, Erhard James Mello, Pete Melnick, Larry David Millard, John Russell Miller, Richard Allen Moore, William Joseph Murphy, Daniel John Myers, Jose Negron Rodriguez, Willard Edward Nelson, Timothy Carl Oakes, Del Coleman Odegaard, Stephen Craig Odom, John Joseph Palucio, Richard Lynn Parham, Benny Frank Parker, Richard Dennis Parker, Richard W. Perdue, Robert Charles Peters,
Robert Vernon Peterson, Dennis Lee Picard, Morrison Lewis Pickett, Monty Gale Pittner, Robert Lee Posey Jr., Stephen Charles Powers, William James Powers, Joseph Ibarra Ramirez Jr., Ronald Edwin Ray, James Edward Reeder, Rudolph Remular, James Robert Rhodes, Richard Fred Ryle, Donald William Richardson, Tony Rehos, James Bill Rogoff, Jean Autry Ross, William Robert Ross Jr., James Robert Russell, Ronald Neal Sample, Jerome Joseph Schlitt, Raul Lerma Segovia, Robert Allen Sisk, Stephen Robert Smith, L.C. Smith Jr., Walter Jack Sutar, Johnny Clarence Spears, Kenneth Alfred Spilker, Robert Lee Staley Jr., Robert Edward Stiro, George Dennis Steeler, Charles Joseph Stolmeyer, Colbin Benjamin Stokes Jr., Tualele T. Swinoa, Thomas Henry Swinea, Brad John Zutz, Charles Thomas Tate Jr., Ronald Eugene Thompson, John Henry Tigner, Johnny Earl Tivis, Gregorio Valdez Jr., Ronald Arthur Van Wembecke, Jesus Roberto Vasquez, Jimmy Paul Wall, Robert Allen Warner, Alvin John Wesolowski Jr., Homer West, Robert Earl Whitbeck, Ralph Eric White, Vernon Wayne Woody, Joseph Z. Zamiora,